You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. Hello and welcome to Mamamia Out Loud. It's what women are actually talking about on Wednesday, the 15th of May. I'm Holly Wainwright.
I'm Leah Freedman.
And I'm Jessie Stevens.
And on the show today, stop telling young women to have sex. That is the message that is piling on from celebrities who are endorsing celibacy to brands who are trying to encourage them to get out there more. Female celibacy is so hot right now. Also, last week, one very problematic famous person took off his shirt and partook in a very public washing away of his sins inside the rehabilitation of Russell Brand. And do you need anybody? Probably yes. Is that a weakness or a strength? Jessie wants to bust the myth of codependency. But first, Mia Freedman.
As the war in Gaza continues into its 8th month, more devastating details are emerging about the situation for civilians on the ground. Mamamia news editor Gemma Barth reported on Mamamia this week that there are reportedly 155,000 pregnant women in Gaza and now only one operating maternity hospital left on the Gaza Strip. The Al Hilal Al Emirati Maternity Hospital is situated in Rafah and has in recent months become Palestinians' last refuge from the Israeli offensive. More than half of Gaza's 2.3 million residents have been sheltering there, making it twice as densely populated as New York City. Israel say that Hamas militants are hiding there and they have started to invade the area in the past week, forcing thousands of displaced families to once again flee. According to the United Nations Population Fund, 155,000 women in Gaza are due to give birth in the coming months or have recently, and their futures are now uncertain. There's a midwife from California, her name's Bridget Rockios, who arrived on May the 1st to help alongside the Canadian medical charity, the Leah Project, who currently have 8 people on the ground in Gaza. And since arriving, she's shared some of the incredibly distressing things that she's seen in her short time in Gaza. She is delivering babies with no soap or gloves or scissors, and it's a shocking situation. What can get lost in numbers and social media posts is that every one of these people, the pregnant women, the hungry children, the dead civilians, the traumatised hostages, they're not just numbers. They're victims of war and terrorism, and it's just tragic. For more coverage on this, check out our daily news podcast, The Quickie, and we'll also put a link to Gemma's story in the show notes.
I can't imagine how scared you would feel if you were heavily pregnant or you'd just given birth, because it's just the most vulnerable that you ever feel.
Well, giving birth during a war, in a war zone.
Yeah. But to not have a maternity hospital is just so unthinkable and so inhumane, and I just have such empathy for all those
The
women.
calculations made in conflicts are always horrifying, but the ability for hospitals to be able to afford care to the most vulnerable, it shouldn't be a matter for debate. There are incredibly brave and hardworking aid organisations on the ground in Gaza who are trying, against great odds, to ease this crisis, including the International Red Cross, who are opening a new 60-bed hospital in Rafah, where the need is great. If you'd like to donate to them or to other organisations like UNICEF and Plan International who are on the ground, we're putting the links in our show notes. Thames is a cold, murky stretch of water that flows through London. It's iconic, straddled by several of the world's most famous bridges and lined by its landmarks. And last week, floating in it was one very problematic shirtless celebrity and his bug-eating friend.
I'm worried about the health. Isn't it yucky?
Yes, it's famously polluted. It is indeed. Perhaps some would argue more so now. Remember when Russell Brand was on every news site? It was only 7 months ago that the comedian, movie star and self-proclaimed guru was the subject of a joint investigation by media outlets over claims of rape, sexual assault and sexual abuse. He's been questioned by police over those allegations at least twice, but as of now he has not been criminally charged. But he has been very, very much cancelled. Luckily for Brand, that wasn't too much of a problem because his increasingly erratic sermons about conspiracy theories, including lots of anti-vax sentiment, but also he was very much on the whole Bill Gates is inserting chips in our heads kind of team during COVID. He'd left the mainstream long behind, right? And he'd built what he hoped, I imagine, was a cancel-proof bunker for himself on YouTube, social media, and in hosting real-life retreats where you could go and learn about breathwork and ice baths and do yoga with his wife.
I could never work out whether he really believed his conspiracy bullshit or whether he was just being really mercenary and pivoting and creating a lucrative brand.
Being radicalized by the YouTube algorithm. Yeah,
I don't even mean that. I mean cynically going, here's a place that I could
make money.
That's what I mean, though, is that he's on YouTube. That's where he's getting all his money. And he knows that when he posts about Bill Gates having a chip in his head.
So he's part of the radicalization.
He's part of that. But he's like, that works for me and my brand and my money. So I'm going to make more of that.
The problem was lots of his followers and supporters and people paying to go and do the ice baths and stuff were women. And it's bad for business if they've decided that you're a predator. So Brand's latest reinvention has called in the big guns, namely Jesus Christ. Brand was baptised in the River Thames. That's why we're back in the River Thames 2 weeks ago. And his bug-eating friend was Bear Grylls, the famous TV survivalist who's also a lifelong Christian, was by his side when he was doing it. They posted about it on social. Brand has posted lots of videos about it. The messaging is that he is officially now a very different person to the one who was a self-proclaimed sex addict. And he, to be fair to him, he had long said that his life had been out of control for a long period of time, quite a long time ago now. Sex addiction, drug addiction, and obviously by very many, many women's accounts, he was not really safe to be around. Now, of course, he is a completely different person. So my question is, and this is close to what you were asking, Mia, cynical me says that a literal baptism and washing away of sins is a new kind of celebrity apology, kind of on steroids, right? We often see when somebody goes through a scandal of this kind and they've got to convince people that they've changed and that they're sorry, they might post an apology, go on a bit of an apology tour. So this could be that. But then the kind me says that he's always been a searcher. That's very clear. And this, of course, could be a genuine evolution. He is selling a lot of merch on his website about it. Anyway, what do we think?
I don't think that, you reading into the PR strategy is you being necessarily unfair because Russell Brand pretty much said the quiet part out loud.
I'm getting baptised. What's been explained to me is it's an opportunity to die and be reborn, an opportunity to leave the past behind and be reborn in Christ's name, like it says in Galatians, that you can live as an enlightened and awakened person. Sometimes I think of non-Christian perspectives on it, like Marcus Aurelius saying, you are already dead, now live the rest of your life properly. Or the Buddhist saying, put down the corpse.
I don't want to be cynical, but is this like the old tailor can't come to the phone right now?
He literally said it's an opportunity. The other part that jumped out to me is when he said it's been explained to me by a crisis PR person, maybe.
The most telling thing to me was what Bear Grylls, he gave a statement to the Daily Mail and he said, faith and spiritual moments in our lives are really personal, but it is a privilege to stand beside anyone when they express a humble need for forgiveness and strength from above. So this is about forgiveness without having to do a notes app apology, which can be weaponized against you. And what I struggle with Russell Brand is that his story has been very much repenting. This isn't a new thing. He's a sort of affiliation with Christianity has been going on for a few years. This isn't totally out of the blue.
Although he was very Buddhist for a while.
He was very Buddhist.
As I say, he is a searcher. He always has been, right?
Yes. But when he repents or when he rejects his former self, it's very much about the things he's done that have harmed Russell. So it's like, this is how things became worse for me. And there is this new age religious sector, particularly men, who talk about being a good spiritual person, but that doesn't extend in any way to treating women well. So
or anyone really well.
Yeah, and he doesn't really talk about that. He doesn't say
helping others.
At least, and look, I haven't watched every minute of his YouTube channel, but I have seen enough Russell Brand to notice that at no point does he talk about how badly he has treated other people and how that might be part of being baptised.
It's kind of an get out of jail free card in a way, isn't it? Because you can't criticise someone's religious conversion. I mean, you can, but it's very hard to argue if someone says that was before and now I am reborn. I have a question about the Thames. You could have done this anywhere, right? Like you didn't have to do it there.
And you didn't have to post about it.
And Bear Grylls didn't have to be there.
No, when I was first looking at these images, I was a bit snitty about it, like a bit like, come on. And then I thought about the conversations we've had about spirituality and religion and how important it is, and I don't want to sort of sneer at somebody's like reinvention and striving to be a better person. But the thing about it is the imagery, because you're right, Mia, like he could have done this anywhere and he could have also done it in private. So it's very public. Now, the thing that's interesting about using this as a sort of comeback strategy, I don't think Russell Brand thinks he's ever coming back to the mainstream. I don't think he is. But I think that, as you've said, Jessie, he is very clearly positioning himself as I can make my own money and build my own empire off mainstream media brands. And there are plenty of other people who do this. So when you do go onto his site and you see that you can buy the merch and you can buy the cap and you can buy the backpack and all those things, this opens up a whole new revenue stream for him in terms of what he might do for religious merch and like religious retreats. And it's kind of like opens up a new stream. That reinvention, as celebrities have always known, like Madonna, 1 minute I'm writhing next to Jesus Christ and then the next minute I'm doing a Buddhist dance and then I'm in my cone bra. Like a constant reinvention is important to keep opening up new revenue streams. And this is kind of like that in the new age way. But what's so true is that what's being forgotten in all of this are the women who were brave enough to come forward about him in the first place. And let's be clear, the stories about that man go back a very long way and very deep. And for a very long time, he was untouchable because he was the hottest, the most influential, the coolest. He had a very untouchable profile for a long time. And it feels like those women have chipped away at that. And now he's Jesus.
Jessie, I'm curious about whether you think that his following, the conspiracy theorists, would they be off-put by all the godliness and the religion? Like, what's the Venn diagram of those two types of people?
I think if you looked at the US demographic of Russell Brand's following and you looked at conspiracy theorists. I'm just thinking about the Alex Jones documentary that I watched recently. And there is something about the Deep South. This is a very specific demographic, but the Deep South who are deeply religious and who have been wrapped up in particular conspiracy theories. Now, I know a lot of people who love Russell Brand who do not believe in conspiracy theories. I know a lot of religious people who also are not into conspiracy theories.
Yeah. Or Russell Brand.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But I think that what he's doing is very strategically making himself untouchable. It's interesting what you say, Holly, about him being untouchable, because if I'm trying to cancel Russell Brand, I'm the internet and I'm trying to cancel him, I can point to something he did 10 years ago, 5 years ago, blah. When that is your former self that I have shed in the River Thames, then that is a watertight way to go, that's not relevant.
Yeah, so it's like saying I deleted the hard drive.
Yes, and this is something that happens with, and this is maybe fair enough, but like sobriety, for example. And you kind of go, oh, well, this person was guilty of blah, 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 blah. Well, now they're sober. And that's a way of changing the narrative. And it also reveals to us.
And it's not to say it's not also, there's truth in it.
It's not also true. Because the good faith part of me is that I would never, ever mock a religious ceremony, and the people I know who have been baptised as adults. It is a transformative, beautiful experience that I am completely invested in. And perhaps just because Russell Brand hasn't repented to us, that
his alleged victims.
Yes, doesn't mean that he hasn't had some kind of, I mean, he's got in his bio something about an awakening, but maybe he is repenting. Yeah, and maybe this is some way of him coming to terms with who he used to be, which reveals a truth, which is that our identity is never static. It's always changing. This is just a very public way of announcing that to your lots and lots of Instagram followers.
Let's spare a thought, not only for his victims, but for the fish of the River Thames who are now swimming around in the old Russell Brand.
I don't know if there's any fish in there, Holly.
Julia Fox, who is, I don't know, I guess an internet it girl. She was probably most famous from the very small relationship she had with Kanye West, who also
from the soundbite where she said,
I was Josh Safdie's muse when he wrote Uncut Gems.
Right.
Uncut Gems.
Uncut Gems.
I don't know how to explain the context.
Uncut Gems.
But if you've heard that, that was Julia Fox.
That was
She
Julia
was in
Fox.
that movie.
And interestingly, Kanye was someone else who had a brief religious conversion. She's made an unexpected admission about her sex life this week, and that is that she doesn't have one, which is pretty much the only shocking thing anybody can say about sex at this point. I was reading a New York Times story about a 20-person polycule.
Wow.
So it's
sounds-
like polyamory, which means you have more than one partner, but it's like these 20 people and all the different ways in which they are connected, sort of sexually and romantically and emotionally. It made me feel very tired. Anyway, Julia Fox has basically shared that she has been celibate for more than 2 years. Here is what she said on a podcast with friend of the pod, Emrata.
And I was saying, like, the only problem for me is sex. I like sex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, I don't.
I
Like, I can
know.
go without. I'm like so good.
And we were talking about that. It really made me think about actually like Marilyn Monroe, because she did not like sex either.
Yeah.
And I think when you're sexualized so young,
Yeah.
people think you're really sexual.
Absolutely.
And you were saying that that's always been a thing.
Yeah.
And you were a dominatrix and everything, but that doesn't necessarily.
I'm really desensitized to sex too.
Yeah.
Like it's not like thrilling for me.
So in recent years, there has been a rising popularity in embracing celibacy on TikTok. There's been a community that's sprung up who refer to themselves as volcels, which is a play on the incel label that was embraced by men. So incels are involuntary celibates. They're basically a group who are very angry at all the women who won't have sex with them. But in the case of these TikTokers, the volcels, they're all about voluntary celibacy. Now, this is bad news for Bumble and all the dating apps. Bumble, though, is a brand that positions itself as being the most pro-women of all the dating apps, and they've launched a $1 million ad campaign that's anti-celibacy to try and convince women that they're wrong about not wanting to have sex. There are these big billboards that show, this really cool-looking woman, and then the tagline is, "A vow of celibacy is not the answer," which has been not very well received online, with some saying that the rise in celibacy is a reaction to the rise in violence against women, while others claim that it's just a backlash to all the sex positivity that we've seen over the past few years. Jessie, are you still having sex? And how much?
Bumble doesn't need me to be having sex.
True.
Poor Bumble. A moment for Bumble, right? Because I don't think what they intended to do and what happened are the same thing. Their intention was, I read that 76% of users are currently men. In order for those men to stay on Bumble, they need access to women who will have sex with them. And Bumble was like, this is our issue. We need the women to be having sex. Now, the tone, the campaign, the finger wagging and the attempt to use shame, which is what sort of the messaging of this was, which is like, you don't want to be a nun, like stop with the celibacy, was perceived as, and apparently was an in-house team, and look, it was an error. I don't think that anyone here is evil, but it came across as very anti-feminist, because instead of going, why are 76% of our users men and women are leaving dating apps in droves? Maybe it's because they have a shit experience on dating apps. Men are sending unsolicited pictures and they're being harassed. Rather than deal with that, we'll tell the women
That they're the problem.
that you're the problem and that we need you to be having sex in order for Bumble to be making more money.
And that's, I think, why the women were so mad. It's like, it's just a very transparent, cynical play to interfere in your sex life for their profits. It wasn't very well disguised.
I think we've talked about this before, that the sexual revolution and sex positivity has given women the message that they've got to feel very positive about sex constantly. When I was dating and I was on dating apps, I would feel like my self-esteem and my confidence was in a good place. And then I would get on a dating app, or I would go on a date, or I would have an interaction with a man as a heterosexual person, and it would be in the gutter. And it was protection for me to go, I'm actually not going to go on dates for a while. That's probably when I was happiest, because I couldn't do it.
Is it about taking back control?
Yeah, and also just acknowledging it's about boundaries, and also acknowledging when I have that transactional sex with that person who doesn't care about me or treat me very well, I feel like shit. So I'm not going to do it. And then you get told, your celibacy is not serving you.
Fuck like a man.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, I'm actually feeling
A bit shit.
Yeah, and a lot of single women that I know are going quite a while without having sex. Sometimes that's a conscious choice, sometimes it's not.
So are a lot of not single women.
Yeah.
Like
true,
this
true.
idea that sex whole needs to be such a key part of your identity at every age and every stage and every moment of your life, whether you're single, whether you're in a relationship.
But singledom is also about having lots of casual sex. For some people it's not, and stop trying to make it that way.
I think it's sad. Like, I think it's genuinely sad because I was watching some of the videos of the women who were pushing back on the Bumble ad, and they were talking about the reasons that they are rejecting dating and sex. And apart from the ones who are doing so for religious reasons or whatever, there was just this overwhelming, depressing level of awfulness that they're dealing with. And they're like, why would I do that? I don't need to do that. You know, because the world has changed, right? It's a throwaway comment and it's very heteronormative, but women don't need a man to have a fulfilling life. They don't, right? So they can do all the things they want to do and not have to put up with the level of shit that they're getting from these young men who may or may not have been radicalized by all the porn they've been consuming since year dot. And it's sad because I've long been a defender of sex positivity because it's also only a hot minute, we should remember, that women weren't allowed to express that they were sexual beings, that we weren't allowed to say what we did or didn't like in the bedroom, as it were, and we had to pretend that it was a precious gift that we would only give away if we were a good girl and all those things. And so humans are sexual beings, most of us are, and sexual pleasure can be incredible and empowering and enlightening and blow your head off and open your mind. And it feels like all that's kind of been lost in this grubby little puddle that we all find ourselves in now. And so a lot of women are going like, nah. And I think that's sad. I don't think they shouldn't do it. Like, I entirely understand. Every single one of these women was relatable when they were saying, why would I put myself out there to be treated like this, you know?
Can we also...
But it makes me sad because it doesn't have to be that way.
Can we also take a moment to acknowledge that these billboards were put up in the US and you are challenging celibacy, female celibacy, at the exact same moment that you are taking away their reproductive rights. So you would like them to have casual sex at the same time.
That they can't get an abortion legally in pretty much any state.
No.
That's so true. I also think it is just a backlash to flicking through Instagram and everyone trying to sell you a butt plug.
But a butt plug doesn't get you pregnant. Actually, some of these celibate ladies probably love their butt plug.
Well, that's a very good... I wonder, because I know exactly what you mean, Mia. Like, sex is being sold to us in many different ways all the time. When I say, oh, it's a shame because sex can be wonderful, maybe they're having wonderful sex with their devices that they bought from the internet.
Who aren't mean to them.
Yeah.
Oh, so true, Holly.
No, but I just more mean that it's now become another measuring stick which we use to beat ourselves up with, that we're not having enough sex or the right kind of sex or sex with enough different people. We're not sexually fluid enough. We're not body positive enough. We're not sex positive enough. And it just feels like, oh man, there are just times in your life where it's not the top of your list. There are other things. You might be grieving. You might be on antidepressants. You might have struggles with mental health. You might be going through perimenopause and just feel like shit. Your sex drive comes and goes for a lot of different reasons. Like, if you are scared, if you are financially unstable, if you are in an abusive relationship, you're not going to want to be having a lot of sex. And I think that we need to not make it seem like having lots of sex or not having sex, going periods where you don't have sex, is somehow shameful. I don't think having a lot of sex should be shameful, but conversely, not having sex should also not be shameful.
You can also date and not have sex.
This is true.
So those
That's
two
what
things
I wondered
are
about
not,
that with the sex. Like, a lot of the people I've seen, and when I was reading there, I'm celibate for a while, what they were generally saying is they're not dating for a while.
Whereas some are saying...
Because it's too confronting and awful.
Julia Fox dated Kanye and said we just never had sex while we were dating. We should probably also mention that Bumble has come out and apologised. They have taken all their billboards down. They've said we tried to do this thing. We acknowledge we did it very badly. And now a lot of their billboards, they're giving space to domestic violence charities and they're putting numbers and stuff on it.
Or pro-choice charities, you know,
true.
because it's like there's a lot of reasons why women don't want to have sex.
It does make you realise, though, how much the culture has shifted, because if you think about Sex in the City, as we were talking about the other week, At the time when that show came out and it was about have sex like a man and Samantha Jones was having sex like a man, and I remember there was an episode where Miranda went on a sex strike for a while when she was single, and then she was just so horny and she couldn't do, all those things. That messaging now seems so strange because the culture absorbed it and we took it in and we got rid of some shame, which is fantastic. But now it's shifted, and now what's cool and is the messaging that women want to hear is you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. And it is really interesting at how quickly that has turned around.
Outlouders, if you want to listen to us every day of the week, you can get access to exclusive segments on Tuesdays and Thursdays by becoming a Mamamia subscriber. Follow the link in the show notes to subscribe and support us, and a big thank you to all our current subscribers.
There's a buzzword you might have been hearing quite a bit lately: codependency. Do you try to fix the problems of your friends and family? You're probably codependent. Do you sacrifice who you are in relationships with a partner or kids? Absolutely, that's codependency. Are you very sensitive to other people's feelings and assume the same feelings? Again, textbook codependency. Ooh. Therapy speak has permeated our culture, and words like this are being discussed on TikTok by faux experts who say that codependency is also code for relationship addiction. But a recent article in The Atlantic put forward a different perspective. Is codependency kind of a myth? The reason why codependency is a bit vague is because it doesn't exist in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Eliza Strauss writes, some people may find it to be a useful tool for explaining bad relationship habits, but the term's popularity also gestures at something worrisome: an avoidance of vulnerability and the natural asymmetries in relationships. To be a person is to be dependent on other people, perhaps in incredibly inconvenient ways. Codependent is a fairly accurate description of the human condition. Holly, should we just embrace codependency? We're pretty codependent, us three.
We actually are very codependent.
Holly hates it.
I don't know how to be any other way.
I like it. I actually quite like it in this setting. It's funny because I don't think of myself as codependent. I think of myself as how they say we've all got a hierarchy of values and our kind of self-identifying values.
A leaderboard.
Yep, a leaderboard. God, there's something else I have in common with my friend Leah. Independence is very high up there for me. It's a value that I have pursued and I am intensely attached to, part of my self-image. But I am deep down codependent because we all are, right? Mm-hmm. But I have learnt not to be in certain situations. In relationships, I entirely understand how codependency can turn into a negative thing. I know that there are relationships I stayed in much longer than I should have. It was clear that they were not necessarily healthy, but I was like, but who am I without you? That's codependency, right?
And you complete me.
Who am I without you is codependency in a way, right? And so I think I've fought very hard against that subsequently to be like, I don't like people being dependent on me, which is very hard when you're a mother.
Yes.
And I don't want to be dependent on you. But I also am well aware, our interpersonal connections are the most important thing in our lives, right?
Yeah.
The relationship between the three of us is definitely codependent. I'm often I don't know what I think about that thing until I talk about with those two. And I want to know, I don't know,
how does
what
codependence do? Yeah, because a lot of those things that you mentioned, Jessie, as textbook codependency just seem like relationships or community.
So what does that reveal, do you think? If we are pathologizing interconnectedness and interpersonal relationships and then wondering why everyone's so lonely, are those things related?
But
what do you think?
Codependency can definitely be dangerous. I entirely get your point that codependency is actually just living and being connected to other people. I care about you. I care about what you think of me. I want to do things for you. And that description that you put there, that sounds entirely healthy. But of course, like almost anything in life, it isn't 100% good or 100% bad. But codependency can definitely be dangerous. When your self-worth is entirely caught up with what somebody else thinks of you and the things you will do to placate them and have them stay in your life and not leave you alone, that is a dangerous codependency, and I have definitely been in that.
Yes. So a deep fear of abandonment is definitely something that if you were seeing a psychologist, they would go, okay, there's a problem here. A deep fear of abandonment doesn't lead to the best, most healthy behaviours. Exactly right. But I think we are allergic to the asymmetries in relationships. you see dilemmas and stuff about whether it's a friend who's going through a mental health crisis or someone who is sick. And when we're put into situations where we have to give more than we take, I think that sometimes it's like, well, I'm not getting a lot out of this. But that's the nature of human relationships. And that's what I really liked about this, was that I'm obviously defensive of codependency because I've been codependent before I was born.
So you're possibly not the best judge of what codependency is or isn't.
I'm feeling very defensive.
Of codependence?
Yes, of pathologizing of codependency, because ever since I was little, even as a kid, I remember a sense that people would look at how close Claire and I were and go, ooh, dangerous. Dangerous.
Really?
Yeah.
See, I feel like you're the only one that's got a get out of jail free card with codependence as a twin. I feel like no one expects twins to be anything other than codependent, and we sort of are fascinated by the ways in which you are, and then if you're not together, we're fascinated. Do you have ESP? What does it mean? Because I think it's like you're a socially sanctioned form of codependence. And in many ways...
So is mother-child?
Yes, to a certain age. And then it becomes frowned upon. So I'm also in that interesting stage as your kids get older where it's like, well, at what point is it codependency? And at what point do you have to like push them away if they like being with you and you like being with them? Are you somehow stunting everyone?
I'm codependent.
I
speak to my mother on the phone every single day. I'm completely codependent.
Is that codependent or just close?
You're mutually reliant on each other.
Okay. So isn't that something we want to encourage in society? Because the people who don't have those connections tend to fall out of society.
I was reading this article and it was talking about the term enabler. Remember that was a really big thing in addiction communities for a while? It was you're enabling the behaviour.
Yeah.
They've done more research on it and they've challenged that because they've gone, if you abandon someone with addiction issues, then you often do more harm than good. So the enabling, just having a strong relationship with someone 100%. Is worth it.
They say the rates of addicts who will find a way to recover is enormously higher if they have a network of people because, and I know this is a specific instance, but it's very rare that it's you who will go, I've got a problem, I've got to fix it. It's going to be your mum who's like, you've got a problem. Your wife who's like, you've got to stop drinking. Your friends who are like, this is causing problems in your life. Your boss who's like, so it is actually your chain of people you're connected with who often will solve it. But having said all that, surely whether or not it's good or bad thing, to your point, Mia, if you love your adult child and they love you and they like talking to you every day and they come around to your house, that's fine unless it affects other areas of your life negatively. Surely that is always the definition of whether something is a problem or whether it's a good thing, right? Does it mean that that's impeding them building their own family? Or, you know, going out and making different connections or moving away to take a job opportunity or, do you know what I mean? Like, surely it's only a problem then. Surely we're not actually suggesting that no one should ever be dependent on anyone. We're just saying, does it impede you?
And navigating where you start and another person begins is central to all questions we've ever had about the human condition, and we're never going to answer it, and we're always navigating it. We're always in situations where it's like, is that what I think or is that what so-and-so thinks? Am I putting their needs before my own? That's just constant. And women are very drawn to this because they feel confused about those boundaries because they're often caregivers. But there's value in giving care as well. Like, rather than just going, we should all be islands and we should cut people off. Like, that's, and the caring about what people think of you is also very healthy. Like, raising kids, you go, being part of being a social person is that you do have a level of wanting to be liked or wanting to be part of the group. That's part of the human brain. That can get toxic.
That can tip into, because of course you're right, like people who genuinely don't give a shit about what anybody else thinks of them are some of the most dangerous people on the planet.
Yeah.
However, caring too much imprisons you. And it's the same with caring. You are so right, Jessie. I can't wait to share all the conversations I've been having with lots of wise women about mid. But that immediately made me think the point you made about how caring is good, and often we tell women that they're caring too much. This amazing writer, Catherine May, you're going to hear her interview at some point, she was saying how what better way of building resilience and wisdom and the kind of spiritual strength we all wish we had than what you've just lived through and continue to live through, Jessie, which is being woken up several times a night, every night, and having to meet that moment with love and patience rather than fury and indignation. And obviously you don't get it right all the time. No. But repeat. People who care are strong. You know, it's really important. Yes. However, once it becomes something that suffocates you, the same as the codependency tipping point, is like once it's like I can't care for myself because all I do is care for other people, that's the danger point.
And you learn, this article made a really good point, which is I have learned who I am through relationships. This person said, I went on a solo trip around blah. Like I've had all these moments and they were great and I learned a lot. But the idea that you learn who you are in solitude is actually not always true. It is through that web of relationships and being challenged and all of that that you kind of realize who you truly are, which rings true to me.
Oh, I like being away from my, as you know.
Well, I was going to say, Hal, you're the least codependent person I know, I reckon.
Yeah, I think
in that you keep moving countries, you keep moving cities.
You won't let Mia track you on your phone.
So true. It's so true. You're resistant to all my codependency overtures. But is the opposite of codependence independence? Because it seems to me, Hal, that all these people, your partner, your children, your friends, are all additive in your life, but none of them are, I was going to say fundamental. I think they are fundamental.
Yeah, of course
none of them are, like you'd be okay if any of them were removed.
Well, preferably not against my will. I do know exactly what you mean.
You're not porous.
Well, that's maybe true, or maybe that's what I tell myself, right? Because I left my home city when I was 19, so I never lived in the same place as my family again after that. And then I left my home country when I was 23. And I enjoyed the freedom of no expectations about who you are. You know how you were saying before about you don't find out who you are in solitude? Some people do, right?
Yeah.
Having said that, I am a social animal. Wherever I went, I built relationships. But what I'm learning as I get older and wiser is that I was kidding myself to think that you always escape who you are and that my family of choice and the place I grew up and all my relationships aren't intensely part of that. But you're right that I'm more comfortable than lots of people.
Yeah.
And I actually get, and this is something I need to work on, I actually get really itchy and awful when people want to get too close and get to know me too much.
Jessie,
I don't like
it's taken a lot of years for you to let us have your phone number and text you out of hours. But I know that you like recoil from the – because is enmeshment different to codependency? Because Jessie, you come from a very enmeshed family and so do I, which is why I think our families have blended so well because I think if like my family merged with Holly's, it would be a shit show because she would just be trying to get into witness protection.
We've never heard the word boundary.
Correct.
Either of our families have no sense of what a boundary is.
We have no boundaries at all. So that works, but I know that other people are completely horrified by it. I also am going to challenge you on that thing about you don't find out who you are when you're by yourself. I think that's the only time you do because particularly if you're susceptible to codependence, I was in a relationship of one kind or another pretty much consecutively from when I was 15. I was never single until I was about 22. And I maybe was single for 2 weeks, between each relationship at the most. And I didn't have a clue who I was because I molded myself around whoever
That's a really good point.
my partner was.
Yeah.
Even when, they weren't all dickheads. A lot of them were, but I just did. And so I think it wasn't until I got to spend a decent amount of time by myself, at least a few months, that I could then recognise the partner that I wanted to have, not just the guy who chose me,
That's a really good point.
Sydney Out Louders, speaking of codependent, all our codependents, our family, our friends are coming to the Sydney show. There's going to be quite some interesting spotting in the audience.
Yes, and the show itself, first half is going to be like the show you listened to today. We are getting up tomorrow. We are planning a show. We are doing it live. And then the second half is let's pull the curtain back. Let's say things we might not say on the mic.
It's a bit worrying because when we're thinking about what we're going to put in that first half of the show, I keep thinking, my daughter's going to be in the audience. Yeah,
We're going to be wearing 2 different costumes, which is what I'm most excited about, things that you haven't seen us in before.
We're going to answer your questions. It's very
It's all happening. There will be celeb spotting in the audience. Mamamia Out Loud Live is presented by Nivea Cellular. It is Thursday night, tomorrow night. Head to outloudlive.com.au or follow the link in our bio on our Instagram page and grab the last few tickets that are left. We will see you then.
You might have missed it, but I doubt it. Piers Morgan interviewed the woman who claimed to be the real-life Martha from Baby Reindeer.
God, I'm surprised he wasn't baptising Russell Brand in the Thames.
Oh, true.
You know what I mean?
There.
Like it was that kind of Venn diagram of just guys like that. Anyway,
we unpack that interview and discuss the ethics of it. We have a bit of argy-bargy about it. Have you seen that Richard Gadd's come out and he's like, if I wanted everyone to sleuth, I would have made a documentary. And I was like, yes.
I'm very ethically, I cannot make up my mind about whether or not it was an interview that should have gone ahead, and we have a great discussion about that.
Yeah.
That is for subscribers.
I called Holly a hypocrite. You did? Because she is one.
We talk about who we believe.
But we're still very
not
close, aren't we?
entirely wrong. There is some murk in my position on this.
Yeah.
There is a link in the show notes to follow to listen to that if you're a subscriber. And if you are a subscriber, we love you. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to Australia's #1 news and pop culture show. This episode was produced by Emeline Gazilas. The assistant producer is Tahli Blackman. And we've had audio production from Leah Porges. Thank you.
Bye. Shout out to any Mamamia subscribers listening. If you love the show and you want to support us, subscribing to Mamamia is the very best way to do so. There's a link in the episode description.